Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey people, welcome to Knowing Animals. My name's Siobhan O'Sullivan. Knowing Animals is a podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars and animal advocates about the work they do for animals. This episode is from our Protecting Animals series. But before we get going, before we find out who our guest is, I have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Now, I've said it many times before, I'll say it once again. ASA does fantastic work to support animal studies scholars. One of the things ASA does is organise a conference every 2 years. The conference for 2019 is actually going to be in New Zealand, which is a coincidence because this week's guest is also from New Zealand. Okay, so I'm not gonna keep you in any more suspense. This episode of Knowing Animals is coming to you from the University of Sydney, but I'm very, very lucky to be joined by somebody from New Zealand. Indeed, I'm joined by Nichola Kriek. Now, Nichola is someone who I've known for many years. She has been working tirelessly for animals over many decades. Nichola is the head of education at SAFE New Zealand. SAFE is one of New Zealand's leading animal protection organisations, a very, very progressive, hard-working, committed organisation. And today we're going to talk to Nichola about the work she and SAFE does for animals. Welcome to the podcast, Nichola.
Thanks, Siobhan. Really pleased to be here.
Thank you. So, Nichola, can you tell us how you got involved in the animal protection movement?
Yes, I can. I feel that my sort of journey has been a little different to other people's because I kind of got into it through work. So I studied at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand, and I have a degree in music and I have a degree in geography and English. And then I went on to become trained to be a secondary school teacher. And I wanted to be a music teacher and a geography teacher, nothing to do with animals. And I liked animals, of course, but I wasn't this typical sort of animal lover who often ends up being an animal advocate or doing the sort of work I do. I couldn't find work as a teacher. And I was a brand new teacher. This is in 1991, long time ago. So I had to look elsewhere for work. And I saw a job at the SPCA in Wellington for a education officer. And I thought to myself, wow, I really like the idea of that work. I do like animals, and I wanted, I always wanted to do something to improve the world that we live in. So I applied for that job, and I got it. And so that was my entry into animal advocacy and animal rights. And I wasn't a vegetarian. I was quickly educated myself. I think I took that job as education officer, not for the education of others, but at first it was a definite steep learning curve for me about animals and animal rights.
How long were you at the SPCA for, Nichola?
I was there for about nearly 10 years, and so my job was mainly going out into primary schools, actually, talking to children about being nice to cats and dogs, but primarily. But I quickly changed my view, and I felt like a huge hypocrite, actually. I would go out and talk to children about being caring towards animals, and then I'd go home and eat them. It just felt completely wrong. And so within a year, I went vegetarian. I was also influenced by, I was doing a lot of reading. I read, obviously, Animal Liberation, and that was also hugely influential on me. Read a lot of other books like Beyond Beef and Diet for a New America, various books that were around at that particular time. Of course, we didn't have YouTube and the internet to look stuff up on, so I did a lot of reading. And that really changed my view. And within a year, by 1996, I went vegan.
Nichola, is it fair to say that you perhaps became a bit more progressive than the RSPCA or the SPCA kind of allows for, or did you become perhaps not the best fit for the SPCA?
Absolutely, yeah. what kind of happened with myself and my husband Hans, who also I met him and he also works for SAFE as well, is that he in particular was doing a lot of campaigning, particularly on factory farming, and I was also including material about factory other things other than cats and dogs in my education program. So I'd often go out into schools and talk about battery hen farming, of course, was big at that time, or very, great gaining traction in people's minds. And teachers were quite happy to hear that. But the SPCA itself it was not in line with what they wanted. So we did have some issues.
So you then made the leap over to SAFE.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about SAFE, the kind of organisation it is, what it values, that kind of thing?
Sure. SAFE was a much better fit for me and my husband, actually. SAFE is an animal rights organisation, while, of course, the SPCA is an animal welfare organisation. So they were all of the types of things that we were wanting to progress, the issues we wanted to progress to do with animal experimentation, factory farming, using animals for sport, hunting, all of those sorts of things were perfectly in line with our set of values. Of course, it was a vegan organisation, so it was a much better fit for us, or for me especially. So when we joined SAFE, actually, we were on 1-year contracts, because back then in 2004, there was not a huge budget. It's a much smaller organisation. There were only 6 of us, and so we had to really work hard to make sure we had a job the following year. And we had to move to Christchurch for the job as well. They only had 1 office then. We've grown a lot in that since that time. We now have 22 staff, 3 offices: Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and it's definitely taken off.
When you think about the things that SAFE has achieved, what do you feel most proud of? What are some of the big accomplishments?
Well, I think one of the turning points for us was the sow stall ban in New Zealand in 2008 or 9, I think it was. And one of the things also was the sort of more strategic campaigning that we were doing. Of course, my work's in education, and I'm, of course, proud of the work I've been doing with our school program. But I think as far as getting public awareness of our work really into the mainstream, that campaign really sort of thrust us into the public eye. And we had been campaigning for a long, long time on this issue. And we had decided to campaign on the sow stalls because we thought we could win it. And there are a lot of issues we could campaign on that are huge, and we know a lot more difficult, like even the battery hens I mentioned before. Years and years and years of campaigning on it weren't really getting us anywhere. But we looked at the situation in New Zealand with sow stalls, with only a small percentage of farmers using them, and understanding that if we really, really focused on that, there was a good chance we could make a change. And having a win really motivates everybody to continue and push further. So I think that was a big turning point for our organisation.
So Nichola, you've chosen to, as you say, be very committed to education. Can you tell us about why you see education as something important to be done for animal rights? And what's your philosophy? What kind of mindset or ideas do you take to that task?
I think with education, the reason I'm so passionate about it and why I'm doing it, I suppose, is because I feel that if we can change the hearts and minds of the young people who are coming forward, who are our future advocates, we're building our movement, and we're not all going to be around forever. We need to have young people who are thinking critically about the way we treat animals, not just as I was. I mean, I was 26, 27 before I even went vegetarian or vegan, and that's a long time to have kind of been in the dark and not really thinking about it and just sort of going along with the mainstream idea of how animals are, which are just property, essentially, for us to do with what we like. The sooner we can get in and start getting young people to start thinking differently about that. I mean, we should be challenging ourselves to think about what we do, and especially when another being is suffering or being harmed by that. And that's something I had thought about it, but I hadn't really been pushed into really questioning it to the point where, well, why are you doing it? Nobody questioned me on that. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to do with their education.
And do you get feedback from people saying, thank you so much, or you really made a difference in how I see the world, or, I've changed my eating habits as a result?
Yeah, well, I do. But a lot of the work I do is I try to kind of sneakily slip in underneath the radar in a way maybe I shouldn't admit that on the radio, on a podcast. But so the work I've been doing is with our textbook series, the Animals and Us textbook series, is that we produce these resources, and one of my goals is to make them really comprehensive, incredible, using some of the top academics and scholars of the human and animal studies movement. There's some incredible people who are within our the 5 textbooks we've produced, and then sort of handing it off to teachers themselves to do the work in the classrooms. I can't be in every classroom. And so it was really strategic thought to me that I wanted to make those resources available. And that's something I think I learned all those years at the SPCA, was that, yes, I'd get hundreds of letters from kids saying, oh, thank you for, coming to our school, et cetera, but I was only able to do that work in the one area that I was in, which was Wellington. I wasn't reaching every other school in the country. So I thought I need to find, and there weren't resources. Kids would come to me and say, I'm doing a project on animal experimentation. What do you have? And there was nothing. And there wasn't the internet. So I just thought I've got to start producing materials they can access and use in their schools. So that was the idea, is just make it accessible to every school. That's why it's a free resource as well. And we just send it to schools without asking them if they want it. They're just getting it. We've only had it sent back from 2 schools, and one of them was a very conservative religious school that only taught religious curriculum, and the other was Christchurch Boys College. Oh, I shouldn't say that either, probably. It was a school in Christchurch that's very conservative as well.
I'm sensing a pattern here. Well, Nichola, I know that you still have a lot to give to the animals and a lot to give to the animal protection movement. But given that I've got you here today, it's kind of nice to have this chance to ask you to reflect back on your years working for the animals. When you look at your years and what's changed, what do you see? What's the picture you see of the animal protection movement or the situation for animals, or both, over the years?
Well, it has changed a huge amount. And I mean, I obviously can talk to New Zealand, but you can see what's happening globally as well. And I'm very excited to see that especially there's so much more awareness of the emotions of animals. People like Jonathan Balcom and other sort of scholars have written books about, and Jeffrey Mason, various other people, that we're really beginning to understand more and more that animals can and do suffer pain and emotions, which I think is something that so many people they just didn't think about. So there's so much progression. Human animal studies has become huge, and it's just constantly growing, which I'm very excited about as well, because there's so much more opportunity for people to start learning and thinking about these and taking the movement forward. And I can't even keep up with it. That's the thing that I find most exciting. I mean, when I first went vegan, I think I knew every other vegan in New Zealand, and we would talk on the phone, not any other way, or meet in person. We knew each other. Now the Facebook groups have got like thousands and thousands of people, vegans on there. I don't know any of them. I can't keep up with it anymore. There's a new vegan product every day almost. It's not just tofu and very watery soy milk. So to me, that not only the sort of lifestyle movement has taken off, but the academic side is also growing hugely. I guess my only thing that I guess I feel like the where it's going to end, where I hope it's, my hope is that of course we have animals no longer ever treated as property, as things that we just use with our own minds and with our own ends, for our own ends changes. But I don't know if it's our animal rights movement that's going to do it. I almost feel like the environmental problems we're experiencing with lack of water, greenhouse gases, that's more likely to push us away from consuming animals. Sadly, that's not very hopeful. But
yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that, because to me, I think, if we do make positive changes, the animals benefit irrespective of why we're doing it. So they don't care what our motivations are. But that said, it is a kind of a damning indictment of us as a species if we make the change, probably because we're most worried about our habitat now, life on this planet, rather than the animals. So, Nichola, does that mean that you and others at SAFE are trying to hook into the environmental movement a bit more? Or?
Yeah, definitely. So we have an Eat Kind program now, which is part of our education department. So we have a much bigger education department than when I first started. It's not just me anymore. There's 5 of us actually, if you count me. So we have an Eat Kind program that looks at challenging people individually to go vegan and look at changing their lifestyle to benefit animals, but we're also talking and educating them about why it will help the environment, why it will help their own health. So those are arguments we're employing as well. And we're also hoping in the future to do a lot more systemic change within society, not just individual change, but trying to get institutions changing what they offer or thinking about what they do as well.
Well, Nichola, you and I are both here at the University of Sydney, and we're here for the New Directions in Animal Advocacy Conference, which is being run by HAN, the Human Animal Research Network. Why is it important for you to interact with academics and come to conferences and things like that?
Oh, it's hugely important. I mean, over the years that I've been working on our education program, one of my sort of strategic goals was to make sure I stay connected to the other educators and academics, especially because the textbooks that I produce, the Animals and Us textbooks that we produce, I can't write them myself. I do write them. I write all the lessons, and actually the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies, Annie Potts and Philip Armstrong, have been very helpful, and Philip helped me write the first 3 textbooks. The materials that we use, the resource materials that we use in those textbooks for young people to study, are all from the leading academics in human animal studies, because they are credible. They are the ones we should be, that you can't dispute that. When you're a teacher, a secondary school teacher in a classroom in New Zealand, and you see a book or a journal extract or whatever article has been written by somebody who is not safe, who is not an animal rights activist, pushing a platform, it's much harder for them to sort of write that off and say it's not valid, it's not. So though it's hugely important for me to learn also what are the new developments happening, what are the new thoughts, trains of thought, what are the new things that are happening in our academic world. So yes, very important to me.
Wonderful. Well, Nichola, I'll have to get my hands on those textbooks and have a look whether I'm cited or not.
Oops, yeah, will be soon.
Now, yeah. Nichola, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions? Sure. Can you recall when you first started to think that there was something wrong or problematic about the human-non-human animal relationship?
Oh, I think that was in the very early stages of me working for animals. As I said, I just started to recognise that cognitive dissonance in myself, and I think I was challenged at a pet show of all things by a woman who said, "Don't you think it's awful that that people eat guinea pigs?" And I just thought to myself, actually, you know what? It's awful that we eat any animals. Why would we be horrified about eating guinea pigs? We should be just as horrified. That was the dawning for me, I think. It seems like a strange dawning to have, but that was when I first started realizing things aren't right here.
Fascinating. So you've kind of answered this in some ways, but perhaps you've got something else to add. Can you recall the first thing you did to try and bring about change for animals?
Well, of course, I could say it was working in education at the SPCA, but really I think for me it was when I started to change my own lifestyle. So yes, when I went vegan especially, and started to take personal responsibility, that was the that was for me the most meaningful thing I did for animals, and continue to encourage others to do the same.
Wonderful. If you had to name one animal advocate who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
I think my husband would have to say it was.
I've had other people name their partner, I can tell you that. Wonderful.
But also Peter Singer. I think reading Animal Liberation was a huge eye-opener for me. Yeah.
Okay. But we should give Hans a shout out.
Oh, we should give Hans a shout out. Hans, you have been incredible and still are.
Yeah. What's his role at the at SAFE?
He was the CEO for many years, head of campaigns. He's now our ambassador, SAFE ambassador.
Wonderful. What's the most important thing animal advocates can do for animals?
Keep going. I think having been in this movement for as long as I have, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself, because you can't help others unless you are in the state to do that yourself. So protect yourself from getting burned out. Don't try and do too much too soon. Realize this is a long, long haul. Be kind to yourself so that you can continue doing the work long term.
Fantastic. Very good advice. If you had the power to change one thing about the human-non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
Definitely would be to change the status of animals so that they're no longer viewed as property. I'm very interested in the idea of animal personhood, which I know has been worked on, and so I would really want us to progress that. I would want that changed so that animals now, they have some legal standing, that they are protected from us.
Mm. So, Nichola, what are you working on next?
Well, we've just done a big evaluation of the textbook series. After 5 textbooks, we realised that it was really time to look at the effect of them, if they're having an impact. That's just been completed, and the findings are that we need to really go a lot more digital, which we're going to be doing. So the textbooks will go online. They already are, but they'll be going onto a digital format more progressively, and we are now researching the best way to deliver a digital education program for New Zealand in particular, because we work very closely with our school curriculum, but hopefully it'll be something that could reach further as well.
How fantastic. So how can people find out more about your work?
Definitely check our website, safe.org.nz. That's you can find all the information you need on there. And if you're interested in the education work, you can look under our education and lifestyle tabs. We also have an animal squad for children 8 to 14. So Safe Animal Squad is another website, .org.nz is another website. Please take a look.
Wonderful. Well, Nichola, thank you so much for joining us for Knowing Animals, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars and animal advocates about the work they do for animals. Now, you can follow us on Twitter at Knowing Animals. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. Don't forget also to leave a review at iTunes, because reviews make it easier for other people to find us and to learn about animals. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals.